What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 90 of the Steam Deck podcast, Flip Screen Games weekly gaming podcast, all about Valve's portable PC powerhouse, the Steam Deck. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined today by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Stephen Radford.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Welcome back to the show, buddy.
Yeah, it's good to be back here talking about video games yet again.
I'm excited because this is I feel like one that's been a long time coming. I feel like we've been saying how folks have been writing in. We got a ton of stuff in the mailbag, and we were just kind of waiting for a slow week. And there's been a couple, we had some guests, we had some big news, we had some competitors putting out hardware announcements, and so we had a lot to talk about. So this week we're gonna get to catch up with you all, the listener, and jump into a big old mailbag. So it's going to be an episode dominated by user questions, and we got some good ones to chew on today.
Yeah, some interesting ones that I wouldn't have thought about, which is always good. It's always nice when you realize that people in the audience are way smarter than me and you.
Oh my god, it's great. I mean, especially like Max and I always you're the smart one on this show. So when the audience is even humbling you, it's like, man, thank God they don't know how to talk into a microphone, or we'd be out of a job. So I want to kick things off with a question here that I know you and I were both interested in diving into. This one comes from Salty Waffles, who wrote in and said, I've got a question. Whenever people ask what I play my games on, or what is that massive Switch thing you are using, I try to explain it because usually the people that ask have very little to no background information on the Steam Deck or even know who Valve is. So I try to explain it, and I end up telling them it's a Switch, but it runs Steam, which is a PC software, and it descends into a very confusing conversation. How would you guys explain the deck to someone who doesn't know much about it? Thanks.
Yeah, so I've had this a bunch. My boyfriend still calls it my Switch. He has no clue what it is. I've tried explaining it multiple times, but he's just like, "Oh, you playing Hitman on your Switch?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So I've given up with that. So I usually do exactly what Salty Waffle says, is I try and explain that it's like a Switch, and you can even play some Nintendo games on it if you want to emulate them. And then that sometimes descends into a conversation about what emulation is, which I ended up doing the other day again.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I think people are just like, oh, cool. So it's like a Switch, but it plays games from somewhere else, and they kind of just take that face value. But I really liked the way, Lucas is coming to play the keyboard.
My cat's coming to sit down, everybody. Sorry, audio listeners.
I like the way Wakahula said that he explains it in the Discord. He said he just says it's like a laptop that you can put in your bag, or it's like a handheld laptop.
Sure.
Which I think a lot more people who aren't necessarily clued up with gaming would understand that it's like a PC. But I do think it's tricky because obviously the Steam Deck goes a lot further than that. There is the gaming mode. It is very much a console when you turn it on, and people probably are familiar with the interface when they turn it on. And like if they've played on a Switch or an Xbox, they'll feel right at home. So it's a tricky one. What about you? Like, how do you explain this?
It's an interesting one because I wouldn't say it's a problem I've had super frequently, because I think most of the people I associate with, if they're not gamers, they at least have some familiarity with video games, right? Like enough that like they are at least aware of like Steam as, the place people play PC games, right? Or something like that. So it's easy for me to be like, okay, so it's a handheld that Valve made that connects you to your Steam library, and that's kind of the point of it. And also I'm using it for emulation, this, that, and the other thing, whatever, right? But for like the more like when I like ordered it, right, and I sent it to my dad's house, and he's like, what is this thing? So him I had to kind of do that elevator pitch for, and that was, I basically just tried to contextualize it as much as I could through things that were more mainstream, right? Like if people are like, oh, like they know the Switch, I think that's an easy way to kind of do it, of like, okay, yeah, so it's like Valve is this company that owns a launcher called Steam, and that's where everybody plays games on the PC, right? If you're playing video games on PC, you're probably using Steam. This is a handheld that they created that lets you access your Steam library on the go and, have like a more console-like experience while playing your PC library is probably how I'd try to boil it down. Because it's like...
But what about people who don't know what, like, I guess, like, you got to start bare bones, if I don't know what a launcher is, I don't know what Valve is. They just, I feel like sometimes you explain things to people and it doesn't go in and they don't understand it, but they're just like, I'm kind of bored of this conversation now, so I'll just be like, oh, okay, I get it.
But see, like, for me, if that person if that's, like, gonna be the place that they go to, then they probably don't actually care about the real answer, right? So,
Yeah,
like
that's true.
like, something that's more akin to Wakahula's response is probably appropriate to be like, "It's like a laptop, but it's a console," right? Like, it's that's what it is. It's a PC shoved inside a console is, like, probably the easiest way that you could boil it down. And again, it's like it's one of those things where, like, maybe that answer isn't totally correct, but also how interested are you in my answer,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Because like, do you want the history of Valve and, you know, like, do you need that context or you just need to understand what the thing is, right?
Yeah, so it started back in 1998 when Valve partnered with Sierra Online to release Half-Life. Yeah, you can start all the way back there. No, but how do
Actually,
you
it goes even further back than that, Steve. A little guy named Gabe Newell worked at Microsoft, right? And then they partnered to make a PC official PC port of Doom, and the rest is history.
Mm. How do you view the Steam Deck though? Like, do you view it as a PC? Do you view it as a handheld console? Do you view it as a bit of both?
Um, I guess it depends on like in what context I'm being asked, right? Like if you're asking me like how do I use it, I would say I mostly use it as a console, right? Like obviously it has desktop mode and I go into desktop mode from time to time to set things up or to tinker around or to load in new ROMs or and whatever, but I'm not really ever using it as a computer. I've seen lots of people, hook up an external monitor to it and actually use it for like work or whatever, right? And it's like I'm not using it like that, obviously. I have a work computer at home. I have a laptop that I take when I need to work on the go or like work in another room that isn't where my desk is or whatever. So yeah, I'm not really using my Steam Deck in any capacity that isn't for games. So 9 times out of 10, probably 9.9 times out of 10, right? It's in console mode, right? It's in big picture mode, and I'm playing it like it's a console. And I think to me, as someone who is generally more of a console player than a PC player, that was kind of the thing that ended up being an attractive point to me, right? Is that like, I spend all day on my computer working, or I'm at my desk, like whether it's doing like my day job or editing video or sitting with you to do the podcast, right? Like I'm in this room working all the time. So like I don't necessarily want to be in the same chair at the same desk by myself, the entire evening while I want to game too. And there's certain types of games obviously that like I want to play on PC. Like if I'm going to sit down and play a MOBA or an RTS or something like that, like I want the mouse and keyboard
Oh, let me tell
experience.
you, RTSs can work great on the
They've
Steam
come a
Deck
long way.
with some of the no, but with some of the community layouts, even the old ones, like
Yeah,
Age of Empires has phenomenal community layouts where it opens up like a little overlay menu
totally.
if you do it, and like the left trackpad only works in like the bottom left corner of the screen, so you can quickly touch the actions that you need to down
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, it's the thing. It's like it's definitely come a long way. But there's still certain things like that I think it's just more comfortable to use a mouse and
Hmm.
keyboard. And if I'm getting into an experience like that, I'm gonna sit down and play it on my desktop. But beyond that, right? Like there's so many advantages to the Steam ecosystem that I regularly found myself not taking advantage of just because it wasn't my preferred way to play. And I thought about for years of like, do I build a second PC that's just for gaming and I leave it in the living room, or I get like one of those tiny, like very, very small footprint type PCs and essentially just like only ever launch it in big picture mode and treat it like a Steam machine, right? And it was when this came along and kind of presented an alternative that like, I haven't really thought about that as much in recent years because
Have you
that's
thought
how I
about it
use
at
my Steam
all?
Deck.
Like, because that's how Max uses his Steam Deck a lot. Is he uses it as a way to use Moonlight to stream from his PC upstairs
Yeah.
to his TV downstairs to play games.
Um, I don't know. It's something I still think about, but I just don't really see there being like a ton of use case for it for me right now because, I think when it comes down to it, the type of stuff that I want to play on the TV, right? That like requires like a more high powered rig or whatever. It's like, I mean, it's all coming to console first, right? Usually. And
To some
while
extent, but some games, might be cheaper on PC or they might not be playable on your current console. Like you might want to play something that's older, or it
yeah,
might just play better on PC. For example, like the the latest Ghost of Tsushima port to PC runs better on PC than
Sure.
it did on PS4.
But to me, it's like, by how much? You know? Like,
Mhm.
I don't I'm not that person, you know? And I don't mean to, discount if you're the type of person who, like, graphics are king and you're, like, all about the highest fidelity possible and the best frame rate possible and all those things, and, like, of course, you're gonna wanna play on PC, but, like, that doesn't matter to me as much, right? Like, if I can get a game that's locked at 60 FPS that has, like, a nice stable frame rate and, like, solid resolution,
But
like
often you can't, right? With this generation, it seems like 30 FPS is gonna be the way forward with the Unreal Engine 5 games. Like, we
sure.
saw Hellblade 2 this week was 30
Mhm.
FPS again on Xbox. There's been a couple of other Xbox games that have been mocked at 30. Starfield was 30 when it came out, didn't have a performance
Yeah,
mode.
but again, it's like, I don't think that really matters, right? Like, that game does not need to run at 60 FPS, and, like, they talked about that was a conscious choice, and, like, yeah, you could run it at a higher frame rate on PC, but is that really that much of a better experience? Like, some people will argue yes, but it's just like, I just don't care like that, and I don't need to spend, you know, $1,000+ to hook up a PC in my living room and have a worse experience more often than not, and it's like, I know that's kind of a hot take, especially on this show, but, like, I think that, like, those advantages are often not worth the extra amount of effort that it takes to get that performance, right? To sit there and play with settings,
Yeah, I
and
was
also, the thing that I think we gotta acknowledge is that most games, like AAA games, do not launch in a playable state on PC, right? They or
yeah,
they
that
they
is true.
come they
Which
come
is it's
way
a sad
later,
truth.
and if they come day and date, it's the worst version, and even when they come way later, a lot of times they don't work. So, it's just like
With the exception, I think, of Microsoft titles and, say, CD Projekt Red titles, they often run really well
sure.
on PC
I
on
mean,
day
with CD
one.
Projekt Red, they ran better, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
a
that's the thing.
million
It's
times
like
better.
I'm not sitting here saying that like that's the catch all, right? But it's just like in my experience, right? The vast majority of the games that I'm interested in playing, they are going to launch day and date on my Xbox or my PlayStation, and they're going to play like as intended. And I don't like, I remember when Spider-Man came to PC, right? And like one of our Patreon producers, Snackago, like sent me a thing. It was like, oh my God, like I'm playing it in wide on the and it doesn't look crazy. And it's like, yeah, it does. And also, I don't like is that fundamentally changing my experience? Like I don't personally think so. You know,
I
I
think for
think that
some people that is though, but I also do think it depends on the game. Like I can imagine, say, Flight Simulator running in 21 by 9 where I can see like the whole cockpit
sure.
and I can then maybe hook up my joysticks and things. But that's an experience you can really only have on PC. The
Yeah,
console
for
doesn't
sure.
afford it
But
to you.
also it's just like to me, it's like, do I want to spend what it costs to have a rig that can run it and then like a $2,000 wraparound monitor? It's like,
Depends
no,
if that's
like
your
I
main hobby. I
don't.
mean you spent $1,000 on 2 consoles, Like if
Right?
rather than spending $1,000 on 2 consoles, a lot of people would invest that into their rig, which I
Sure.
guess is why,
Yeah, but then it would
um
be another $2,000+ for the monitor you're talking about. Again, it's like if that's what you want to do, that's great. It's just like to me, that's not what I'm looking for.
mhm.
And then when you're talking about the wraparound monitor and like the extended display and everything, in the example you were asking me, I'm trying to play in my living room. So I don't want to do that anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like it's a preference thing, right? And it's like I feel more immersed on a like theater style screen than a wraparound screen on my desk. Like to me, that's just not a very immersive experience. And you know, it's fine because it's like some
I think
games.
it depends on the games you're playing, right? Because a lot of the games you're playing are the single player narratives. They're designed to look like a movie and
I
feel like a
mean,
movie.
I mean, I guess, but I wouldn't necessarily say like that's the vast majority of what I play. Because I mean, I play just as much. Like I would say, I play just as many small indie titles that
Mhm.
are more at home on a handheld screen, which is why
Yeah,
I have a
yeah,
Steam Deck
100%.
and
Yeah,
why I
yeah,
play on Switch, right? So it's
yeah.
like, to me, I feel like the computer monitor is kind of like an uncomfortable middle ground for me, where it's
Yeah.
like it's not as big as I want it to be, and it's not small enough to feel intimate and like have the convenience of it being in my hands and everything. So like that's for me like why the deck is such a enticing device is that it kind of exists in that perfect middle ground for a player like me, right? Where like I I like PC gaming to an extent, and there's plenty of like like I've talked a lot about how I played League of Legends for 8 years, right? Like it's like I've spent a lot of time playing games on. I played Overwatch on PC, like. That was a game that launched on consoles, and I could have played it there, but I wanted to play it on PC because mouse and keyboard was a better way to play FPS,
Mhm.
right? So it's like, and also I was playing it online with friends, so I wanted to be on Discord and I wanted to be, dialed in or whatever. Um, but yeah, I think for me, just like a lot of experiences don't end up hitting that sweet spot of like wanting to sit down and play it at the monitor or whatever. But again, I mean, I've played some of my favorite games ever that way. Like I played Undertale that way, right? Before it ever came to console or anything like that. So, you know, to me, the experience is always way more important than the platform, right? Like I grew up an only child and I was not athletic. So I pretty much always had all of the consoles or 2 of the 3 consoles or
Yeah,
whatever, right? Like, I'm used to, like,
it's
being
just a
kind of
delivery method, really. You know, it's like,
yeah,
oh, it doesn't really matter if it's on PlayStation or Xbox or PC, as long as what I'm enjoying is good quality content. You made a good point about you know uh, PC gaming and you having to tweak the settings to make it look the best and to eke out the most fidelity. I think this question from Salty Waffles has made me realize that there's a few different people that ask what the Steam Deck is. Like, there's some people who are just like, "Oh, what's that?" And they're interested, and they might be a PC player, and they're intrigued, and they've not heard about it, or maybe they have heard about it, but they want to have some more information. But the majority of people that ask me about it are people who maybe have a Switch or maybe don't have a Switch, but they know what it is and they kind of just want a little bit more information about it. And then they'll say, "Oh, what games can you play on it? Like, can you get this? Can you get that?" And most of those people, I would never ever recommend getting a Steam Deck because of that reason of you're going to have to spend so long tweaking settings and figuring it out, and you're probably going to get fed up because you're used to just putting in a cartridge or downloading a game from the eShop and just playing a game. And it's very much not that experience. So I think it's difficult for me to describe it as a console in that way because there is so much more legwork involved. Now, granted, some of the newer games do have great default settings, like a downloaded Hitman, because they've like rebranded the trilogy now, and you can kind of get everything as part of like the Hitman trilogy. It's like the final one, and as part of that update, it's got a Steam Deck profile. So when it
very
downloads,
nice.
it automatically set to the settings that it recommended. I did tweak them slightly. I turned on Intel XeSS and tweaked it a little bit, but majority of people aren't going to want to do that. I really don't think if you're a console player, it's very alien to come over and be like, whoa, what is all these settings? Because I'm used to maybe having turn off motion blur, and that's like the only option in the graphical settings, or maybe there's a performance mode, but that's it.
Yeah, right. It's like it's such a different beast, right? To, like, make that one decision or make that one change or whatever. Yeah, and I think, depending on what you play, it's, like, easier, right? Like, I think if you're really into indies and stuff like that, like, a lot of times, like, they're more likely to just work because they're not as, like, intensive, but I think if you're somebody that is, like, very interested in playing, like, the AAA stuff and whatever on it, then, like, yeah, for you to get the most out of it, I think it takes a little bit more effort, you know? It takes a little bit more of that, like, PC know-how, which is why I think it works really well for someone like me who's not, you know, um afraid of PC gaming, right? Like I have owned and built, multiple rigs or I haven't built it myself. I always have somebody else do it because I'm not that guy.
Thanks,
Um
DJ.
yeah, yeah, thank you. But you know what I mean? Like going through the process of like picking parts and setting benchmarks and understanding what my goal is and like I have enough familiarity with that stuff that the things you have to do on the Steam Deck are not alienating. It's just like, oh, okay. It's like one extra step. I'll look up a guide. I'll do this. I'll do that. But I know what questions I need to ask to get the answer I want. Right. And I think that's where it gets, I guess, it's neither, right? It's not quite a PC. It's not quite a console. It's a console like experience. It's a PC like experience. But that's what's special about it. It's like it's a hybrid, And I think that's like interestingly, because obviously I think people compare it to the Switch because it's also a handheld. But I think in its own way, like it is kind of similar in the fact that like they are both these like modular hybrid devices, and you
Mhm.
can kind of
You can plug them into your TV if you want to, and you can play games on them, but they don't look quite as good as they would on a big console. They're like maybe a little bit, slimmed down in some aspects. But
similar compromises. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's a good question.
yeah, it was an interesting one. It definitely took us on tangents.
Yeah, you and I, have an easy time with that, though, I'll say that much. All right, so we're gonna jump into a bunch more questions from the Steam docket in just a second here, but before we do that, let me remind you that this episode of the Steam Deck Podcast is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of May. For the last time, they are Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, aka Sobi, Snackago, Steve Stompy, Susan Likes Cats and Also Boobies, Ty the Dude, Voodoo Vic, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flickscreengames. You all are the realest of the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. Remember, if you want to go above and beyond and show your support just like they did, if you want to write into the Steam docket and get your question read on our next mailbag episode, or if you just want to come and join the Discord, keep the conversation rolling between episodes, be a part of the community, connect with other folks that are playing games on their Steam Deck. Make sure you come and get involved all the ways that you can by heading over to flipscreen.games. That's our website where you will find links to do all that and much, much more. However you choose to get involved or show your support, we thank you for tuning into another episode of Steam Deck Podcast. All right, this next one comes from Shitty Foo, who wrote in and said, if the next Xbox is a reference design per rumors, will we see a gaming OS race kickoff, as in Xbox versus Steam OS? This could potentially shift the gaming competition front. Would Sony join this race too, considering the gentrification of console hardware?
So to fill people in,
Interesting multi-part question here. Yeah.
yeah. So to fill people in, that it's not really a rumor that it's going to be a reference design. This was something that Jez Corden over at Windows Central pondered and was like, what if they did a reference
So
design
real
and let
quick,
other manufacturers build out a console in the same way that Steam boxes work, Steam machines work, that they would come up with the design, they would come up with the console, and it's how Nvidia make their GPUs as well. They
right.
come up with the design and then they say, Asus, you can go make one, or HP, you go make one, that kind of thing. I think it's an interesting idea. I don't know that it's going to be the direction they go in, especially considering Microsoft have the Surface hardware, but they have just done it with the Copilot Plus PCs. They came up with the reference design for those Copilot Plus PCs. They put all that hard work in on their Surface products, and then they also teamed up with Lenovo and Asus, and we saw what they had as ideas for
Yeah.
consoles.
I don't think this makes sense for consoles as a market, because when you think about the fact that generally speaking, right? There's obviously exceptions to the rule, the Nintendo Switch being a very famous one, but generally speaking, the uh the business model of a console, right, is you sell hardware at a slight loss and you make a return on software. I don't know how you I don't know how you go about this in a way that would be desirable for whatever manufacturer stepped in to design these boxes. Because
Well, my guess would be it's the same model that Valve was exploring, right? That SteamOS was going to be available to be put onto multiple
right.
handheld devices. They were obviously talking with Asus. We spoke about that on the ROG Ally
Right,
X
but my point is
episode.
I don't think that consoles are a viable business model if all you're doing is selling hardware. This is like the exact conversation we had with, Bob back in the day, like, when he came
Mhm.
on back in the day, it was a couple months ago. He came on to talk with me and Max, and we talked about Ioneo, right? And that part of the problem with Ioneo is that because they're a hardware company, they have, a pressure to continually iterate and make new hardware, and then not necessarily support the old hardware, because the way they make money is by you buying a new Ioneo, not buying it and then playing on it, right? They never get another interaction with you financially. So I think unless Xbox partnered with somebody in the same way that like Nintendo partnered with Nvidia to come up with a custom chipset, if they were like, okay, we're going to partner with this specific manufacturer and we've figured out a way where, we can take the responsibility and the cost of, developing and then, actually printing and maintaining the development and production of the console, right? Like maybe that could make sense where like you have a specific partner that, hey, like we're great at making hardware, you're great at making software, like let's, collaborate. Fair enough. Like that's certainly possible. But I think the idea of it being like a reference design where it's like, "Hey, we made this and now anybody can just go ahead
Well,
and
it's
make
not
it."
anybody. They would license to multiple partners in the same way that they've done with these Copilot Plus PCs. Only specific manufacturers can build those. It's not like it's
But
available
even
in
so, I'm
all of
saying
Windows.
if it's anybody that can make a deal with you, can do it,
Yeah.
right? And it's multiple producers, I don't think that that's profitable for any of those hardware companies.
Maybe
because
not for the hardware companies, but well, I can't see why it wouldn't be for the hardware companies because it's no different to them building out a laptop. It's no different to Asus making an ROG
no,
Ally
it
and
is
putting
though.
Windows on it, but rather than putting Windows on it, they would put Xbox OS on it, and
No, but
Xbox OS would be the Xbox store, and it would be front and center.
yeah, but it is different because like laptop, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I don't understand the business model of selling laptops, but they come up with a new line of laptops every year. There's new hardware every year, and like the business model is that somebody that bought a Dell laptop 5 years ago, when the new one comes out, they upgrade and they buy a new one, right? Or when the new MacBook comes out, you switch over, and like they're constantly getting a hit from you by you buying new hardware on, the timeline that, like, like every computer becomes basically unusable within like 5 to 6 years, right? And like you're constantly needing to do that upgrade. And then also if you're, you know, some of them you get services sold on the back end as well, right? Like it's like there's some kind of, um like with Apple, right, for example, right? They get you on services front to back, right? Where not only are
Mhm.
they monetizing you buying the new hardware, you're paying for Apple Care, you're paying for maybe an Apple Music subscription, you're paying for Apple TV Plus, like you're in it, right? And like it's not just you buying the hardware that makes them money, it's you being in the ecosystem. But for the companies that are just hardware manufacturers, they're constantly putting out new hardware. Otherwise, they're not making money. And I don't see how, like, if Xbox can't make money selling Xboxes because Xboxes don't sell and they're the number three, console sales are not what's making them money, right? Like, that's the understanding we have. How is that profitable then for a hardware developer, right? For Dell or HP or whomever, right? To come in and be like, yeah, we'll be the only people that make this device that doesn't sell. Like, what?
So I
Unless
think I
unless
think the
Xbox is giving them a big chunk of money that makes that
What
worth
that
it.
would be my guess is that Xbox gives them a big chunk of money. So we're going to partner with you. You have to put Xbox OS on there, but Xbox OS only allows the Xbox store, so they have to buy games from the Xbox store in the same way they do currently on an
Yeah,
Xbox. And it basically works like that. Maybe there is a desktop mode or a developer mode that people can unlock in the same way that there is on the current Xbox as well, if people want to tinker and do things. But there was that rumor that they was going to potentially team up with Steam, and Steam would potentially come to Xbox last week that we spoke about. So
yeah,
I
we'll
kind of
see.
feel like at the moment they're exploring all options. I think probably there's the potential that the next Xbox may not be as costly as the next PlayStation if they go down the ARM route versus the x86 route because the chips are very different. So I think there's some kind of thing that Jez had here with his idea. I like the concept of reference hardware. I like the concept of it. I agree with you. Maybe generations get shorter if this turns out to be the case, and maybe it is a
Maybe,
5 year cycle instead of a 7 year or 8 year cycle, and it is like, well, in 5 years we're going to do
uh,
this. Or maybe it's what Nintendo said that they, or I think it was Xbox, right? That they wanted to follow the phone model that they,
sure.
and maybe they do follow the phone model that every single year a new, slightly better one of these comes out. Maybe it's slimmer, maybe it's got a different screen, maybe it's a little bit more powerful, and people can upgrade. And like a phone, it'll work for 5 years. You'll get a certain number of updates, and then after that, you kind of move on to the next one, and you can
I
either get the latest version or you move up to one a couple of
Yeah,
generations behind.
I don't know. I just don't think that model makes sense for consoles. I really don't. Like when you're talking about phones and all these other things, like they're just such different devices, and it's like the idea that like you own an old phone and you acknowledge that your phone is like 5 or 6 years old, so when a new app comes out or whatever, you can't run it is like that's understood, right? And like that's part of like you were just talking about, right? Like I don't think that the console player wants to go through like playing with settings. I don't think the console player wants to go through the like is my device that I paid for compatible with this game that's coming out? Because that's very confusing. Because then it's like how do you acknowledge
That's
what
a
those
marketing beat, right? It works on
yeah,
the
but that's
iPhone 15, but it doesn't work on the iPhone 12.
right,
And
but
like
that's
that's very clear.
yeah, but
You know,
it's
it's
different because when you think about the way that people use cell phones, the way people use smartphones generally, right, is you browse the internet, you shop, you go on social media, you're watching videos, you're on TikTok or whatever, right? Like those devices, or I'm sorry, those uses are going to work on any device that you have, right? And like even if your device is old as dirt, you can probably still access a lot of those things. And the point where you actually get, like, forced out of it, where you're priced like, you're forced to upgrade is deep in the life cycle of a device, right? Like, you've had it far past the point that they expected you were gonna have it. Whereas, like, with consoles, like, that's the model, is that you invest at the beginning of the generation or whenever you get it, right? And that you have a reasonable expectation that for somewhere between 5 to 8 years, this is the only device that you're gonna need, and that every game that comes out is gonna play on your device.
And maybe that's what they do. Maybe they guarantee that for 5 years you're gonna be able to play every game, and then at that point, that's when things start dropping off.
I
I
just think that's such a complex marketing problem, though. So what?
I
Like,
I
we're
don't
gonna
know
have an
if it is.
Xbox
I think it's more complex at the moment for, say, something like the Steam Deck, right? To navigate that and know what games work with my Steam
The
Deck or
Steam
what
Deck is
games
not a
work
mass
with my
market product,
PC.
though. The Steam Deck doesn't need to do those things because the metrics for success for the Steam Deck are different. Valve is happy for that thing to sell 1,000,000 copies in its first year on the market. That was a success. If
And
the
maybe that would
Xbox
be a
sold
success for
1,000,000
Asus.
copies in its
Or
first year on the market, it would be a failure.
It's a tough one. Maybe this is gonna be a completely separate thing. I could see them working on a handheld as potentially a reference design with an Xbox OS, because I do think an Xbox OS would work really well on, say, an
I agree
ROG
with that.
Ally or a
I think that
Lenovo
would be the
Legion
way to
Go.
do a handheld Windows, is you just call it Xbox and you come up with, like, an Xbox PC launcher.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a possibility. I think they do need some kind of fixed SKU, though. I think that's why the Steam Deck is as successful as it is, because developers have a benchmark that they're working to.
Yeah,
I want
exactly.
this to work on the Steam Deck. It's not going to change. It's not changed in 3 years. Is it going to change potentially in another 2 years? Maybe, but at least then the Steam Deck is still going to be the lowest common denominator. That's where I'm targeting. Is this, it should work on this, and anything else is,
That
you know,
That's why I think the iterative thing gets just so tough, because it's like it could very quickly become a thing where it's like, so how many Xboxes are on the market then? You know?
mm,
And it's like, so you're
yeah, we've
telling
seen an issue with the Series S, that even just the 2 SKUs has been an issue for them.
yeah, so what happens when 5 years from now, there's the Xbox Series S, the Xbox Series X, and then the Xbox Series X 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028, and 2029. So we have
Yeah.
7 SKUs that we're actively supporting. Just doesn't make sense. You're gonna start running into all the same problems that you run into on PC,
I
where
mean, unless they go with the same thing where it is, we're gonna support this for 5 years, we're saying this is a generation, and then after that, you'll get the Xbox handheld 2 or the Xbox whatever it
yeah.
is 2. And
Potentially, but I mean, like, I think if they did that right now, right? Like, I think everybody would be really mad. Like, that rumor of, like, "Oh, the next Xbox is, like, coming in 2026." I'm like, "I hope not for their sake," because I think people will be pissed. Because if you look back on this generation and it's like, "So what did we have to show for it? This is supposed to be the best, biggest Xbox generation of all time, and all of the big games that they, have marketed the generation around have come late and underperformed."
Mhm.
Right? And even if you like those games, we like a lot of those games. We liked Starfield, right? Like, I liked Halo Infinite, sure. Like they didn't set the world on fire. They weren't Tears of the Kingdom. They weren't even Spider-Man 2, you know? Um, in a lot of cases. So it's like the idea that it's like, all right, we're ready for a new generation, when it's like we've had people write into the show saying, like, I don't know why anyone would feel ready for a next generation. I don't know why developers would feel ready for a next gen. So it's like,
I think the Xbox next console is gonna be a very different generation. I feel like it's Xbox's Nintendo moment. It's this generation, we can probably mark it as it was a bit of a failure for us. We didn't sell
yeah.
as many consoles we wanted. Game sales declined. Game Pass subscriptions probably declined because they don't disclose those anymore, so they definitely have declined. And so we're going to take a break and we're going to come back and just completely smash it with the next console. I think that's what their goal is at this point, 2026, because they've spoken about the next console already, that they're working on something really special and it's going to be a really generational
Yeah,
leap in performance. And that's really rare to hear from a console manufacturer before, like years in advance of when they're ready.
totally.
And we had the same thing happen with Nintendo with the NX. It was like, well, we're working on the NX, but still go by the Wii U. We're still making a couple of games for the thing. So I kind of feel like it's the Nintendo moment that they've
Yeah.
got at the moment.
Yeah, I hear that. I think that makes sense to me. I wouldn't be surprised if the next thing is more gimmick oriented.
I
And
think it's a
like,
handheld. I really
gimmick
do.
has, like, a nasty connotation, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I really think it's gonna be a handheld that you can dock. I think it's going to embrace machine learning in a big way because they've announced this week, Microsoft announced that they've got their own machine learning algorithm to compete with DLSS, and that it works on any hardware in the same way that Intel XeSS does. So I kind of feel like that's the route they're going down, and it's matches the strategy that we saw in the leaked FTC
Yep.
documents.
It'd be interesting. To answer the rest of the question, like, could Sony join this race too? I don't think so. I think it makes a lot more sense for Microsoft to do that, right? Like, given their history of being services oriented, their ownership of Windows, right? Like, I think the idea of them kind of proliferating a gaming centric version of their OS like feels like a way more natural evolution of their current business than Sony um throwing their hat in that ring. Never say never, right? If I think if that's where the future is, if we're moving away from consoles eventually, then maybe. But I don't know. I feel like that ends up becoming such a like, how is this different than a console then? If it's just you're running an OS from one of the console manufacturers on a computer, like instead of a box that they made, it's a box that you took more effort to buy. I don't know. It just to me feels like so removed from the status quo of what Sony is. And like Sony is the most traditional of the three in terms of what we do is we sell a box and we make high quality games that you can only play on that box. And I think until they're forced to stop doing that, they won't. And, we've talked a lot about their current situation, but go look at the recent earnings report and the stuff that's been coming out of it like this week. And they straight up said that this is like the most profitable generation they've had. So it's
But they did also say that it was lagging behind the PS4. It wasn't where they wanted it in terms of sales, and
yeah,
that they expected it to be higher. And they also said they want to bring more people to the PlayStation platform as a whole, not
totally.
necessarily PS5, through, I think they called it peripheral devices, which my guess is that they're probably gonna bring like streaming to the PlayStation Portal or something like that to kind of bring you to the PlayStation.
Or like you said, PC, like there's been,
Yeah,
they had some listings
that
about
that
like
I wouldn't probably call a
mobile.
peripheral device though. Like I would say, like in my mind, when I think of a peripheral device, it's like an accessory. I could see the PlayStation Portal game streaming because they announced as well that Destiny 2 is going to be one of the first games on their cloud streaming service that they're launching worldwide later this year. So there's a lot of interesting things that PlayStation's working on, and I kind of feel that the new co-CEOs could take this in any direction. It's like a
Mhm.
complete clean slate. Jim Ryan's not there anymore with his live service strategy. They could potentially shift and go, you know what, the handheld space is really hot and spicy. Look at the Steam Deck, look at the Switch. We need to be there. We need something in that kind of arena.
Especially if there's any truth to the Xbox rumors, if they're working on that, then I could imagine that would be something that would maybe motivate them to not want to be the only one out. But yeah, I don't know. I think the idea of them like moving into an operating system or something like that to me seems a little outside the realm of reality. Whereas like the Xbox leap there just makes so much more sense, just based on what company they are.
Hmm.
So interesting one. All right, this next one comes from Cold Soul, who wrote in and said, pulled the trigger and ordered an OLED deck yesterday. My question is, how much of a pain is it to get GeForce Now working on the deck, and is it worth it? Also, what tier subscription should I sign up for? I don't really plan on using it anywhere, but I guess they mean like outside the house. Oh, okay, no, I get it. I don't really plan on using it anywhere but the deck since my gaming rig already has a 470 Ti Super. Okay, I get it now.
Hmm. So we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, that they now have a Steam Deck installer. So if you head over to the GeForce Now website, there is a dedicated official Steam Deck installer. You'll need to do it on your deck in desktop mode. And when you do that, it will automatically configure the GeForce Now to install to gaming mode. So you don't have to do anything. It's like a one-click install, follow the process, and it'll kind of go through. In terms of the membership and what tier would work well for
I'm
you,
looking them up right now because I don't remember what they are.
yeah, it's really tough to kind of figure out where you want to be because the free tier gives you a 1 hour session length and it's ad supported, and it might be enough for you to just kind of get a flavor and see if what this is something that works on your network and whether it's something you want to do. But I would probably go with the priority mode. The ultimate mode supports up to 4K and 240 frames per second, and you obviously get access to the RTX 4080 servers, which is their top-notch rigs that they've got. But you still get ray tracing on the priority mode, and you've got to remember that the Steam Deck screen is only 900p, only supports 90 frames per second, not 240. So I think with 1080p and 60 FPS and 6-hour sessions, the kind of priority plan is probably the one I would go for.
I'm gonna take your word for it, dude. Holy shit. I'm like, they're making me click through like 3 to 5 screens before they let me see the pricing breakdown. So forget it. I'll take Steve's word for it.
But yeah, to kind of answer your question, very, very easy. And as far as I'm aware, it runs kind of flawlessly. It basically just runs in the browser in the same way that it would on any other PC. So if you've had good experiences with GeForce Now on any other device on your network, then you'll have a good experience on the Steam Deck.
Nice. Uh, so all right, let's get into this next one from the Largo Embargo. Do you guys ever get the impression that Steam doesn't prioritize their updates and fixes properly? The reason I ask is because every single update that comes, there seem to be fixes here, there, and everywhere for a million things that I never even knew were issues. When the obvious glaring issues that really harm the quality of life never seem to get fixed. Big one for me is the docked experience. Every time I play docked, I always run into issues with the controller not detecting properly or the deck just not even acknowledging that I hooked it up to the dock. These seem to be stuff that shouldn't be that complex to fix, so I have no idea why these issues still exist. Sorry if my question sounds like a bug report.
Wow, the docked experience on the Steam Deck podcast. There's a surprise, but I
It's a
I
a classic pairing.
yeah, I think this is really tough because I work in software development. And I kind of feel like this would be coming from a project manager looking at the stats and saying, well, we can see that only 10% of Steam Deck players have even plugged their Steam Deck into a dock. So why are we going to prioritize that over the fact that, this game doesn't launch, or that we know we're going to do the Steam Deck OLED. So we want to make sure we support an HDR pipeline. Those are, and I would imagine they've got limited resources. They have sold over 1 million of these, but they're still a really small team. So I kind of feel like they know where they need to prioritize things, but sometimes those priorities don't align with what you want as a player.
Yeah, and I think that's when it's important to remember just the law of anecdotal evidence, right? Which is something that comes up on our shows all the time, right? Which is that like I think for a lot of people, perception is reality, right? So it's like what I've experienced must represent the average experience, right? With this device or with this game or whatever. And, we talk all the time about how, games will come out and there will be, some controversy around performance or crashes or saves getting eaten or whatever. And it's one of those things where if it doesn't affect you, it's really easy to be like, I heard people talking about that, but it wasn't a problem for me. So who cares, right? Like, obviously, it must be overblown. Um, but that's the thing is sometimes with this shit, it is a luck of the draw. And like I've had that experience many times, Largo, where I'm like, man, I've never even heard that this was a problem. But then you go look on like the Steam Deck subreddit and there's like a very popular post about it that got upvoted. And you're like, oh, maybe that's why it got dealt with. Right. There was conversation about it. And I think to the point that you made, Steve, about the docked experience, I think that's definitely probably what it is that, the amount of people that actually own a Steam Deck dock or even a third party dongle or whatever, right, is probably a fraction of the number of people that own a Steam Deck. And as much as that sucks because we all bought a not cheap external device that was supposed to expand the usage of our Steam Decks, and ultimately it doesn't that much, or if it does, it comes with all these caveats and compromises. And I think that sucks, and it's a bummer of an experience, and it probably has to do with the fact that there just aren't that many of us that care about that, right? And it's a thing we've talked about with like retro gaming, right? Where it's like, why hasn't PlayStation figured out backwards compatibility yet? And it's like, well, because it costs money and they probably know that people won't really use it as much as they'll talk about wanting to use it.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's even my experience with emulation, right? I'll have an itch to play a game that I'm nostalgic for, like Toy Story 2 on the PlayStation 1. and I'll play like 1 or 2 levels for maybe like an hour at most, and then I'll just be like, "That was cool."
Got my fill.
And yeah, and I've got my fill, and I'm gonna go play something more modern. And I feel like that's a lot of people's experiences.
Yeah, and I think that's true for a lot of things, right? Like, I think ultimately, that's the problem you end up running into when you're talking about, like, trying to serve the needs of a mass market, right? Because, like, what you and I want or, Largo wants, right? Like, this docked experience, like, might not matter to 90% of players, but then to the 10% that are constantly like, "Man, this is, like, the one thing I want. Why aren't they fixing this? They said they were gonna fix this. It's been out for a year. Why hasn't it gotten any better?" Um, or why hasn't it gotten better enough, right? I think sometimes it's just an unsatisfying answer,
Mhm.
and I don't think it's, I don't know that I would agree that it's them not prioritizing updates and fixes properly as much as it is that, when it comes to software development, like there's just so many variables to contend with some of this stuff that like somebody has to be at the bottom of the list, right? Something has to miss out. And generally speaking, you're going to want to deprioritize the stuff that's impacting the least number of players, right? So maybe you've just been lucky and like these bugs that are affecting other people are not hitting you and that's great, right? But
There's always a new fire cropping up though, like the Fallout 4 had issues launching on the Steam Deck. It was the new hotness again because of the TV show. Well, of course they're going to redirect whoever was working on something else to go, can you please fix Fallout? Because it's it's number 3 on the Steam charts right now, and no one can play it on the Steam Deck.
yeah, and I mean, we have another question here from Diamond4G64 who said, should Steam intervene with EA breaking compatibility on multiple games on the deck for their shitty EA anti-cheat? I am losing EA WRC with version 1.9. The game works flawlessly on the deck, for fuck's sake. And I think like that's to your point, Steve, right? There's so many things that are like Bethesda released this game and broke it, and now we need to, recertify it as Steam Deck verified, or EA introduced this new anti-cheat thing. So now all these games that work
Well, they
don't
did the
work
same
anymore.
thing with the launcher, right? Like Jedi Fallen Order was working fine, and then all of a sudden it wasn't because the new EA
With
launcher
opening the
came out.
launcher and you
Yeah,
couldn't click on the thing to accept, it's just like so there's like a lot of things like that that'll crop up and then that takes attention away, that takes resources away. And Valve doesn't necessarily have the same amount of, you know, um like people on the ground to deal with this as a bigger
mhm,
company because obviously they're a big company in terms that they make a lot of money, but they don't have as many employees as, you know, the quote unquote competitors that we would consider, right? Like obviously Xbox is employing a lot more programmers than Valve.
yeah. To answer Diamond's question, I think it really sucks. Like, then there needs to be something done about this. Like, you should not be as a developer able to just upload a patch that then breaks the game for everyone on specific devices. You bought the game, you should be able to play the game in perpetuity within reason. But I think adding anti-cheat, I mean, this is such a common problem at this point. Like there are solutions for anti-cheat that work on Linux. There are lots of games that work with anti-cheat, Helldivers 2, for example. But with EA, they've got a history of this, right? We just spoke about the launcher. They did the exact same thing. And even just this week, It Takes Two has now finally removed the EA account requirement, doesn't require the EA launcher anymore on Steam. So I'm hoping that's a sign that things are going to move in the right direction with at least EA. And at some point, I think Valve needs to do something about this, whether that's a case of I can download older versions so it continues to work for the cases of like single player games when they've broken. I should be able to just go, well, I want to download version 1.8 instead of 1.9 because that one worked fine. Or reject an update, or Valve should identify that the update no longer works on the device I'm using and just block that update from even patching and just allow me to continue playing the game that I was playing 2 minutes earlier.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something I'd love to see. I'd love to see them kind of iterate on some of those things just to kind of eliminate some of these like problems in the future because they are like I think unfortunately pretty common problems. Like this kind of thing happens on deck not infrequently. But I get it though, right? Because it's a tough challenge because it's like, you're essentially going to have to change the rules of how patching and things work on Steam and make it more restrictive, specifically to cater to this device that a fraction of the number of people that access Steam are using, right? That doesn't mean we don't matter, but also it comes back to that question from before, right? Of like, doing something like that might be a good idea, but it takes resources, it takes time, it takes, person power. And, that's all stuff that, they have other problems they need to fix with the main launcher and with the user experience for the 90+% of people that aren't on Steam Deck, right? Are not experiencing these problems because they don't play
Yeah.
those games.
Yeah, it's a real tough challenge. Software development's always a case of you've got a list of problems that's ever growing. You never reach the bottom. The list is never cleared. There's always a new feature or a new bug or
And we
new
that's why video games
hardware.
launch with bugs, right? Like it's
Yeah.
like you could, you could test a game forever and constantly squash bugs and still find them. It's just how it is. Software development is tough. And I think at the end of the day, like it all comes down to moving around the limited amount of pieces that you have on the board.
Mhm.
And it's like it sucks to be the person on the end of that where it's like, oh, the thing I care about is at the bottom of the list for whatever reason, right? Whatever the explanation is, it doesn't feel good, and I definitely we resonate with that for sure, Largo, right? We're always complaining about how if there was anything we would fix about the deck, it would be improving the docked experience, it would be making it more dynamic. And yeah, it's clearly just not a priority, right? For probably the reasons we laid out. But, hopefully it's something that you see them get to eventually, or that maybe when we get iteration, for like a successor device or something like that, um, that maybe our docks keep working.
Yeah, I wonder if the dock thing comes when they develop a box that plugs into a monitor or a TV, and they finally figure it out for that. That's when we got a bunch of fixes for the original deck when the OLED deck came out, right? We got the ability to change vibrancy and things like that because they put that work in for the OLED model. So it's potentially something like that's going to happen. But yeah, great question.
Yeah, a lot of great questions today. Thank you to everybody who wrote into the Steam docket. Remember, and there's a couple of you that we didn't get to your questions yet. Don't worry, we still got them. We'll get to them when we can. Thank you all so much for joining in and writing into the show. Remember, if you want to do so, you can hit us up at flipscreen.games. That's our website where you will find links to all the places we are all over the web. You can write into the Steam docket. You can go check out our sister shows, Nintendo Noise and the Flip Screen Games podcast, if you want to hear us talk about things that aren't happening on the world in the world of Steam Deck and PC gaming and everything. We talked a lot about not PC gaming inadvertently today. So if you want to hear us talk more about Xbox and PlayStation and all that stuff, you can go check those shows out. They're a great time, and I think you'll enjoy them if you enjoy this show. So go give them a listen. And of course, any of the other ways you want to get involved, whether that's joining the Discord, whether that's showing your support on Patreon, you can do all that and much more over on flipscreen.games. Head over there, click on some stuff. It helps us out a hell of a lot more than it costs you. So please go over there and do that, however you choose to get involved and show your support. We thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Steam Deck Podcast. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Steve. We'll see you next week.